slides. Since the budget was released yesterday, so much of my slides are going to be shameless plagiarism from the budget documents of DOE and also a couple of other sources, namely the Washington Post. So I told Bonifer I'll make sure that I make the slides and any other materials that I use available to you after that the slide presentation is over. But just be aware that this has sort of been put together as a result of other materials out there, so don't quote me on this. So thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to just run through my set of slides. I'm going to try to get through them as quickly as possible so as not to monopolize the time and leave a little bit of time for Q&A and discussion. So let's go ahead and get started here. Let me make sure I can change slides here. Hold on one second, guys. There we go. Okay, so this is a graphic from this morning's Washington Post, because we're going to start from sort of the 50,000-foot level and start to zoom in a little bit. This will give you a sense as to the budget and the budget proposal in comparison to previous years, revenue and spending as a percentage of U.S. GDP. And as you'll see, we are at a point now where we've gotten through the main spending spike of the stimulus and the revenue drop related to the recession. Things are starting to go back up again. You know, in general, I would say that the President's budget this year, you've probably seen the headlines this morning about the President's budget being, quote, DOA. And I would definitely say that at a macro level, given the makeup of the Congress and specifically the House of Representatives, yes, we don't expect that the House is going to buy into the macro blueprint. But as you know, the devil's always in the detail, and the budget focuses, has a lot of it holds within it a lot of the agency's plans and hopes and aspirations. So let's move down the chain here. But generally, as a budget, I mean, you're going to hear a lot of talk about how, you know, there's broad disagreement about Obama's budget, but when you look at it from the macro level in terms of the economy, there's clearly a structural budget deficit that's there now, but it's pretty, we're getting back to more normal budgeting years. This is, again, another graphic from the Washington Post. This is the winners and losers. The circles that you see here are basically sized proportionally to the size of the agency's budget. You'll see the Department of Energy on the right-hand side as a green bubble. They are looking overall at about a 2.6% increase over the FY2014 enacted. So it's one of the areas where the President has chosen to make additional or propose additional investments. This is from the Secretary Moniz's slide presentation yesterday to the budget stakeholders meeting that I attended. It gives you a general breakdown of where the funding is within the various divisions of Department of Energy. Obviously, as you can see, the energy portion of that is quite small. The nuclear sliver is again much smaller than that. So the nuclear security budget, which includes both weapons and non-proliferation and naval reactors, dwarfs the civilian programs and continues to do so. I'm going to sort of pull out of this here, and I want to go to another. Let's go to this one right here. This is the top line. The top line account, the accounting of the budget request, and as you'll see some fairly. This is a fairly standard request in the sense that energy efficiency and renewable energy. Let me see if I can annotate here. All right, let's see here. Yeah, so you can see, so right here, I'm going to go along the right side. EERE, that funds solar, wind, renewable research, up 20% over the FY14 enacted level. That's fairly normal. You'll see here the next one down, obviously nuclear, you're looking at a 2.8% decrease over FY2014, but in fact the budget level overall looks pretty good because FY2014 had a couple of notable congressional ads. There was, I think, $20 million for hot cells at Oak Ridge University, and in fact, we can actually take a look at that now. You can, let me just stop annotating here. So this is where we sort of start from last year. And you'll see here, let me see if we can annotate again. So you can see here, so $33 million for NGMP was a one-time request, wasn't requested in the budget, was added in there. The other one is, let's see, where the fuel cycle development. Where are the hot cells here? Let me go down the. Well, I can't seem to annotate and scroll. Yeah, so you'll see here the. Well, it's not. There was $20 million for hot cells at Oak Ridge. So there were a couple of add-ons in the 14 final budget that weren't carried in the 15 budget, but overall the number is the same. You'll see some of the other areas. Fossil gets a cut as it does every year. The D&D fund goes down. ARPA-E goes up. The big cut you'll see here. It doesn't show large as a percentage cut, but is the MOX program, which actually is right down here under defense non-nuclear proliferation. You're looking at a cut of almost $400 million for the MOX program. That's really sort of the big news of the big bad news of the budget this year. So let me sort of go back here. Now, couple of interesting things. One, what the department has done this year in their budget is tried to identify 5 areas where different offices of DOE are actually doing similar research and development work and try to structure them together so they're cross-cutting initiatives. So you'll see here the 2 of most interest in the nuclear side is the subsurface initiative, to basically begin to put together and better coordinate some of the common challenges in geologic environments. You'll see the $192 million is sort of the combined investment. It's not necessarily new money, but clearly the nuclear program has a relevance there as it relates to repositories. The other one that's probably of greatest interest to the nuclear energy community is a focus on supercritical CO2 research. So you're looking at Brayton cycle technologies with efficiencies of over 40%. This one actually is where the Office of Nuclear Energy is the lead agency for this particular initiative, and they receive, I believe, about $27.5 million new dollars proposed in the budget to begin to do some demonstrations, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. But that certainly is one difference in the budget this year over previous years. The other one that I talked about a little bit, but you'll see here in the third slide, the proposal in the budget is to have the MOX project put on cold standby. So the program itself, funding for the program itself, is reduced about 40%. Obviously, this is going to be a big battle in Congress this year. Lindsey Graham, also Mary Landrieu from Louisiana, that has the big CB&I facility down there. They're a contractor to the MOX program. This is probably going to be the marquee budget battle this year. And I think that it's you have people in the community that really wanted a fast reactor and didn't want MOX, and then there are others who say that the biggest rap against the nuclear industry is we usually get about 70% of the way there, get over budget, and always run the risk of closing it up. So there are going to be people on both sides of this issue, but this is really the one to watch. This is where, at least in D.C., a lot of the big money is being spent. So now we're going to go to Pete Lyons' slide. Pete, so the way it kind of works is at DOE they have a budget rollout session every year. The secretary comes in to speak overall about the budget. That's the slide that the couple of slides we were just looking at. And now we're going, and then everyone goes into breakout sessions, and Pete Lyons runs the breakout session on the NE office. So that's kind of what I'm going to focus on today. So you'll see here, this is the proposed budget for 15. Yes, it looks like a cut, but when you actually take out the hot cells and you take out the one-time NGMP money, the underlying programs are all stable and, in fact, probably get increased certainly over the previous budget request. So the folks at NE are much happier this year than they were last year. We'll go into each one of these in a little bit more detail, but that gives you sort of an overall sense as to where things are. So a couple things, and before we leave or get into too much detail here, for those of you, especially in the utility industry, that are familiar with the budget process, every year the administration includes what can only really be described as a tax to fund the decommissioning and decontamination of the Portsmouth and Paducah enrichment facilities. That tax is levied on nuclear utilities. That again is in there this year. There's not, like so many other things that the administration proposes in its budget, it's probably not going to make its way through Congress. The industry through NEI will fight that pretty stoutly, as they do every year, and it probably just doesn't have a lot of traction anyways, but that's happening. The other thing, for those of you in the university community, it's Budget Groundhog Day with the integrated university program. As you'll see here from this slide, the DOE portion of the IUP was appropriated at $5.5 million, which was about a $500,000 increase in 2014. But as is always the case now, the OMB does not allow DOE to request that funding, and so that number is a 0, and we'll be back in the appropriations process fighting that again. So let's just go down the list generally. SMR licensing technical support. Last year they requested 70 and they got 110. That was a number that I think the community recognized that the 70 requests last year on the administration's part was probably a little bit too low. It was included in the omnibus. The request this year is $97 million, significantly higher than where it was last year. I think it remains to be seen whether or not that money is sufficient, but given what's been going on with B&W Empower and the fact that they have not completed the cooperative agreement with NuScale, I think that number probably is a pretty good guess. But if anybody has any other information that would suggest that number should be higher or lower, please send it to me. Again, the supercritical CO2 initiative, new program funded at $27.5 million. Reactor Concepts R&D shows being down, but in fact, if you take the NGMP adds out of it, is probably up a little bit over last year. Same thing with fuel cycle. Neat, and we're going to go into each, well, I'd say about 80% of these in individual slides. So let's kind of go there. This is the SMR licensing technical support program. It is the goal obviously for FY15 is that the Empower team will submit their design cert application to the NRC by the end of the year, although that timeline may be in jeopardy. That Tennessee TVA submits their permit application to NRC for Clinch River. And the hope is that NuScale will be able to also submit their design cert to the NRC before the end of the FY15 year. So again, here's this what they call the STEP program. It is a collaboration between NE, the Fossil Office, and the the EERE office. And this really is I think, a real win for the Office of Nuclear Energy in the sense that the money had been spread around and not necessarily been coordinated. There had been an effort underway to create basically a 10-megawatt sort of heat source integrated testing facility. That now will fall under the leadership of the Office of Nuclear Energy. Obviously, this has significant impacts, not just for, sodium-cooled and other nuclear reactors, but concentrated solar and also high-efficiency fossil plants. So the fact that NE is leading the way, I think, is a good thing. But again, this is new money. The administration is going to have to go up to the Hill and convince Congress that this is the right thing to do. Although I don't think the lift will be out of this world. Reactor Concepts, what they've done this year, what they've proposed, and generally when the administration proposes a change in budget category, whether they break something out or collapse something, Congress usually likes to follow along with what the agency proposes. Maybe not right away, maybe if there are some objections up on the Hill, but this year what you're seeing is they're taking the SMR Advanced Concepts R&D and merging it with advanced reactor technology. I think it had become a challenge internally to account for these different programs. Is this reactor going to be 299 megawatt or 301 megawatt? Here they can just put it in the same account. And again, you'll see the numbers here. You're going from 82 to about 70, but when you take out the adds from the bill last year, the underlying increase is the underlying funding level is an increase. And you'll see here some of the planned, and then of course you've got a continuation of the light water reactor sustainability program, which seems to be pretty safe and sound in the budget right now. This will allow for the post-radiation examinations of the TRISO fuel. They're going to be able to do some of the other post-irradiation examination experiments that they want to do. So it's a pretty good funding level here. The fuel cycle R&D accounts, a big focus you'll see here is on used fuel disposition research and development. They're going to be doing sort of generic R&D on waste packages and strategies. Most of the advanced, and I think what they've done, you'll see here under the advanced fuels, they've I think moved some money out of that and into the R&D for used nuclear fuel. Most of the focus on advanced fuel is accident-tolerant fuels, silicon carbide, and other types of cladding that can resist or cope with high temperatures and cut down on hydrogen generation. That is a big priority of Dianne Feinstein and others that are on the Energy and Water Appropriations Committee, and so they're continuing to make a full court press to develop those. And you'll see here the fuel resources. There is an increase of $1 million to continue to do work on uranium recovery from seawater. That's something that they want to try to begin to understand a bit more about the practicalities of that. As I understand it, most of the work is being done at PNNL, and they've made some pretty good progress in terms of understanding the technical feasibility of the pathway there. So this is the page where the administration talks about how they are interested. This is the closest thing you get to a waste policy from the administration, given the current political environment now, and what they have essentially been doing. And you'll see here in the second bullet point, they have ongoing discretionary appropriations of up to $200 million. for the duration of the waste management mission. So basically what they've done here is that they've built in their out-year budget numbers, they are assuming roughly $5.7 billion in funding, some that will come from direct appropriations, some beginning in 2008, or the majority of which will come from the nuclear waste fund. I mean, this is I think, as much as anything, it's an aspirational slide to talk about how they'd like to move forward, but they obviously, given the current situation now, they have to be able to show that they've got some idea of how they're going to pursue it, and I'm just going to leave it at that. NEAT is the Nuclear Energy Enabling Technology. Obviously, a lot of focus on modeling and simulation here. One that really gets a lot of focus is the NEAMS program, the Nuclear Energy Advanced Modeling and Simulation Program. Gets about an $8 million increase over FY14. That's modeling down to the atomistic level. And as I understand it, a lot of that you're seeing more cross-pollination between the NEAMS program and the CASTLE program that has more of a direct connection to industry. So clearly more of a focus on modeling and simulation. And the other thing that's in there is the where is it here? Let me just there is the API program, which is the program that would allow for better post-radiation examination of materials. That was originally proposed. That's been scaled back to something called IMSL. I don't necessarily have the breakout of the acronym there, but the goal is to start small in terms of building facilities for post-irradiation examination and then build off of that. So they've scaled back the initial approach, but the goal, I think, ultimately is to get back to the API plan. Radiological Facilities Management, officially starting with the FY14 process, the NASA's, the space, the manufacturer of PU-238 primarily, but the space and defense materials production has been moved out of the Office of Nuclear Energy, and NASA actually now has funding, and there is funding, I'm told, in the NASA budget request to fund space nuclear applications, and that, I think, is probably a good thing in the sense that the money in many ways will still come back to NE, but that NASA will have to carry it in their budget, and obviously the baseline budget hasn't reduced quite that much, so that money has gone back into other projects within NE, and NASA will now be the one to have to carry the water on the appropriations side. And then research reactor infrastructure. So really, the only thing in this account left is the funding for fuel for university reactors, and you can see there's some MUR and MIT, and the TRIGA reactors. There should be enough funding in there for fueling needs. And then finally, INL Facilities Management. This is basically INL's facility budget looks pretty good, with Mike Simpson being chair of Energy and Water on the House side. I don't think Idaho has much to worry about here. And the security program has been brought underneath the NE umbrella. It was in a different account, in a defense account previously, and during the sequester, the funding for that program was cut much more substantially because it was the sequester cut deeper for defense funding. So it's back in the core NE budget. That's probably a good thing. But again, INL, I think, is going to be okay. So what's the next step here? I think, as many of you know, as you watch, this is really just the administration proposing, but Congress then has to dispose. And so You'll see now the House and Senate appropriations committees, subcommittees will start to hold hearings. Energy and Water will start to hold hearings very soon on the different aspects of their budget. The difference in the budget this year is that the budget agreement of last year already includes a top-line discretionary spending number. And so assuming the House and Senate appropriators mark up to that funding level and that there isn't interference from the Tea Party or the more left-leaning side in the Senate, they'll be marking up to the same number, which should ease passage of something in the end. But again, it's an election year, and especially the Senate is very afraid of taking tough votes, and appropriations bills are always a good place to put controversial wedge issues up for a vote. So I think what you'll see is hearings and markups. You will see markups probably occurring sometime in the May timeframe. Floor action on the bills in the House in June, July, but the conference or the end game, the final legislation, probably will be postponed until after the election. They'll probably come back for a lame duck session and hopefully do something similar to this year where they pass an omnibus bill, but that omnibus bill is fairly specific and includes it's not just a continuation of prior year funding. Although in the unlikely case that there would be just a plain CR, you got what you got last year, clearly NE would still do well. So at least the nuclear R&D budget looks pretty strong. And for the university programs funding, the other thing I didn't mention is the NRC program. For those of you in the university community, you know that the integrated university program is split, $5 million or $5.5 million at DOE, $15 million at NRC. Much like DOE, NRC did not include funding for that in their budget this year. This is what happens every year, and we just have to work to get it added back in the appropriations process. So I'd say overall a pretty good year, and there will be obviously some fights on mocks and some other things that will need to be taken care of in order for that to finish a good year. But it's a good start, and certainly something where the administration is has given us in many ways a better starting point. So with that, let me stop and maybe take some questions and engage in a conversation.
Hello, Craig?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. This is Jeremy Pearson from University of California, Irvine.
Hi, Jeremy.
Good morning. Thanks for making the talk available.
My pleasure.
So you mentioned the recommendation to zero out the IUP again. Is this like last year where they're trying to recommending to consolidate all the funding into the three categories, NSF, education, and et cetera? And do you think that there's a likelihood that will be accepted and go through, or just get rejected again?
Well, thanks, Jeremy. So let me just, for the rest of the audience, give a little bit of background. The funding for the integrated university program has been included in something that the administration calls its STEM program consolidation. So they look across the government complex, and there are, I think, 100 to 200 programs that they are trying to boil down into 3 or 4 or some smaller number. I think a smaller number of programs and consolidate them. So and historically they've zeroed out the IUP and suggested that would go into more of these categorical fundings, and that NSF really should be the prime entity to fund these sorts of things. So that consolidation last year, when they first proposed it last year, basically fell on its face and it didn't go anywhere. This year, as I understand it, I haven't looked that closely at the other parts of the budget, but as I understand it, they were maybe a little less, excuse me, a little less ambitious this year, and have done some consolidation including the IUP, but that part of it, as far as I'm concerned, that will be DOA when it goes up to the Hill. That's the Office of Management and Budget trying to put a flag post in the ground. But I would be shocked if the folks in Congress and the Appropriations Committee gave their suggestions any credence. All right. Any other questions? Come on, I couldn't have done that good a job.
If you have questions for Craig, you can send either the question through chat or Q&A, or you can just send me a note and I'll unmute your phone line. Oh, okay, one more question. Hang on. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Hey, Craig, one more for you.
Sure.
When we were out there in the DC conference last November, and Moniz was speaking, he was talking about the MOX program and the funding, and I think he made it pretty clear, and I spoke with him after too, about plutonium from warheads not being used for energy.
Right.
I've been quite curious if it's not going to be used for energy, how it's going to be, the disposition is going to be carried out. And he has been kind of saying that he's going to mention it soon, but I'm not sure if he has or what you view the plans are there.
So, well, the administration is sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place. The MOX project, the costs of the MOX project have continued to increase over time. And as I understand it, a majority of that increase, I mean, they're the usual cost overruns, but the majority of that, the cost overruns have occurred from changing the security requirements and the design requirements of the facility as you know, for things like aircraft impact and the like. You know, I think that there are, you don't have a lot of people lining up to buy MOX fuel at this point. I think they recognize they probably will have to give it away for free or close to free. That increases the life cycle cost. There's been some study out there, and Moniz, Secretary Moniz quoted it yesterday, that the full life cycle cost of the facility is going to be somewhere around $30 billion. You know, so then the question becomes, okay, so if not MOX, then what? And of course, you know, there was an entire plutonium disposition study that occurred back in the late 90s. Moniz was involved in that ended up getting us down the MOX path. And then the question is, if it's not MOX, then what? Well, you know, there are only so many things you can do with it. You know, I don't think that there's a lot of appetite for, you know, for accelerated driven transmutation anymore. You know, the other suggestion that has been made, and the other, I would say, group or affinity group within the community, is use that in a fast reactor, burn it in a fast reactor. That's certainly what the UK is looking at for their surplus plutonium. The Russians are doing it as part of their, you know, getting rid of their plutonium stockpile. But, you know, the question is, at this point, you know, at what point can we start from zero and put a reactor together, and how much is that going to cost? And, you know, is the reactor just going to be for plutonium disposition? Will it have other uses? These are all things that would have to be considered, but it would probably take years, if not decades, to effectively stop the MOX and change course and get something you know, through the NEPA process that was on its way to completion. So, I mean, let's not kid ourselves here. If the MOX gets shut down, it's a long road to get to anything else, and you know, that building is almost complete. I mean, it is a good part of the way done. So, I suspect what you're seeing here is is goal posting, and what I mean by that is this. So OMB, and they're doing it for the Integrated University Program, for example. What OMB will do is, when they know something has broad support, they will purposefully lowball that number in the budget request and then use that funding for their priorities, so that Congress then adds back what they want, and they have basically a bargaining chip in the budget process. And that, it makes sense at a political level, right? I'm not going to propose funding what you want. I'm going to propose funding what I want, and I'm going to let you find the funding that you need for your pet programs, and then we'll negotiate down the line. Of course, it makes the budget, the further apart that Congress and the administration are in their requests, the harder it is to obviously to reconcile all these differences. And based on the political support that MOX has, and and Ariba and Shaw, the two main contractors there, are very active on this. What I would suggest to you is that I don't think the administration's proposal is definitive, and I think you're going to see a big battle on it this year, and I'm pretty sure that what the administration proposed will not just be enacted by Congress. So we're not at that point yet to really know what will happen next.
Angie, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Craig, where do you anticipate, or was it said, where this supercritical power generation work will be done?
Well, that's a good question, Angie. I think that, let me just see if I can go back. Let me see if I can move back slides here. I'm doing this the slow way, sorry. So I think it's still, it remains to be determined. I don't think it's been decided yet. What you'll see in the, here we go, what you'll see here in the FY 2015 plan accomplishments is they're going to issue an FOA for industry support, review the applications, and award one or more FOAs for industry support. Now, I think industry support is shorthand because it could include collaborative teams of industrial partners, university partners, national lab partners. Sandia, as I understand it, Sandia really has the lead on turbine technology. There's also a company in Colorado that's done a lot of work on the systems themselves. I think University of Wisconsin has a pretty big team, especially in the area of like heat exchangers. I mean, what they want to do is build some kind of engineering scale demonstration around the 10 megawatt heat level. And so they're going to need a heat source and all the other supplementary systems to actually test it out, test it out at the megawatt scale. And I don't know, that will be, I suspect, the funding opportunity announcement will probably be a very highly competitive one, and they will down select through that process. And the law, the way the appropriations law is written every year, or at least has been in years past, is that if the administration wants to cite a user facility, it has to do so through a full and open competition. It used to be in the old days that they would, the leadership of DOE and the labs would get together and decide sort of who got what, but that's no longer the case. If they're going to cite a facility, they've got to put out an FOA, and pretty much anyone can compete. So short answer, Angie, is we don't know. But it will be decided through a competitive process would be my best guess.
Yeah, got it. Clearly for 15.
Mm-hmm.
They'll just do planning, right.
Are there any other questions? Okay. This concludes our webinar for this morning. I want to thank you all for dialing in. The files that you've seen this morning, both the slide presentation and the PDFs, will be available on ANS's website by the end of the week. as well as the recording of this session. Again, thank you for dialing in this morning and have a great day.